Välkommen till min fjord. You're listening to Minisode 8B of Fjordhammer. You've just listened to a bit of the Metroid Prime theme, one of my favorite theme musics of all time. It's really, really weird, but it's so atmospheric and it fits the game perfectly. And playing you guys out will be the Brinstar theme. So I hope you guys enjoy a bit of Metroid in your life. And coming up is gonna be the Play Garden review. Joining me today is Tyler Mengel. So you know that this book review is gonna be even more interesting than usual, especially because this book is fantastic. So I hope you guys enjoy. It's time for another Fjordhammer book review, and this time I'm joined by a guest. Welcome, Tyler.
Hello.
You're becoming a bit of a regular on the show. You were on last time as well.
Yeah.
This month we're reviewing the newest Age of Sigmar book, Hallowed Knight's Play Garden by Josh Reynolds. And I understand you've already released a review for this on your website?
Yeah, for a week or two ago, maybe, I put up the review. I read, as soon as I got the book, I was finishing up something else, but as soon as I finished that book, I jumped right into it. So I've been looking forward to it for a while now.
Yeah, it's the first novel for Age of Sigmar since City of Secrets in January, so we've been waiting quite a while for this.
Yes.
So that's one of the reasons that we want to review this book, just because it's new, it's been a while, and because anyone who's been reading the novels for Age of Sigmar knows that any Josh Reynolds book is likely to be quite an event. What's this book about? Alright, it says Hallowed Knights. It's got the Hallowed Knights in it, and it's got Play Garden. So, Tyler, how would you sort of quickly sum up the story of this book?
It's essentially, Grimm gets, lost into the Garden of Nurgle, and Gardas has to go in after him and, try and find him. Which, when I first was reading that short description, on the Black Library website when it came out with it several months ago, I was kind of really confused at first because before it was Gardas who got lost in the Garden of Nurgle, but it's kind of the point. It's kind of flipped. So I guess the Steel Souls just have a really bad time of staying out of there.
Yeah, they've a bad habit of ending up in gardens they don't want to be in.
Yes.
Yeah, because this is set after the Realmgate Wars, which is kind of exciting. It's like the second novel, the second story, and are really set after the Realmgate War series, after the campaign last year, and we really get a sort of insight into the setting there, don't we?
Yeah, there's the beginning of this book has a bunch of stuff about Azir, which I find really interesting, and obviously there's a lot about the realm of chaos for Nurgle that we get to explore a lot as this book goes on. I was just thinking also, kind of in my review, I think I might have mentioned this, but one of the ways I thought of this book is it's kind of like the Odyssey, but with Warhammer in Realm of Chaos.
Yeah, that would be one way to describe it. It's a very travel-heavy story.
Yes.
So, for those of you who don't know the sort of background of Gardas and the Hallowed Knights, they're actually one of the sort of original Storm hosts. We've had stories of them from the very beginning. Gardas falling into the realm of Nurgle is one of the first sort of stories that have differed Age of Sigmar from the old Warhammer Fantasy setting. I think it's fair to say. And it's now nice. I think it's really nice to get sort of a continuation of that story that's independent of the campaign books.
Yeah, I'm glad that Josh Reynolds decided to stick with Gardas, because I'm pretty sure this wasn't something that, Black Library or Games Workshop came to him and said, we want you to write this book. I'm pretty sure this was something he pitched to them It's like, I had this idea. I really liked writing these characters. He really enjoys writing Nurgle. You can tell from the way he writes all of his Nurgle stuff throughout several of his books. So it's just nice that he decided to continue this character forward, because Vandus we haven't really heard much about or anything about, since the Allgate storyline ended, and Thastos has got his own. I don't want to spoil anything for the storyline, but Thastos' story might be a little bit difficult to continue. So it's just nice to see one of the original three essentially have, continue forward, and it sounds like it's going to be a series as well, so this won't be the last time we see Gardas, I'm assuming.
I think it's an independent story. It stands quite well on its own, but it also really, really connects well into a saying that I've heard a lot recently is the Age of Reynolds. He's written 4 novels now and several novellas, and he's like the Nurgle faction here is one that we've heard about a lot of times.
The Order of the Fly.
They're the knightly, honorable sort of Nurgle that you might not have heard about that before, but he really makes them work in their own despicable way.
Yeah, he makes them, they're much more human, almost. You can relate to them even though they're Nurgle. You can relate to them as people, because they still have aspects of their personalities that are something that we, attribute to people nowadays. And it's just twisted and kind of like a dark version of it, but it's still something that you can associate yourself with.
One of the real strengths of this book is the characters, really. I wasn't honestly expecting to enjoy the characters of this book as much as I did. I mean, I've liked Gardas and Grim, and I was really fascinated by Torglug showing up. But I think the characters of the story really, really carry it.
Yeah, not just them. I feel like the supporting cast of characters is really, really strong here too. From people complaining about Stormcast are all the same. Just read this book, and each Stormcast that he takes the time to highlight, they're all very different from each other. Even all the ones within Gardas' warrior chamber, like Kadok and Enyo and Morbus, they're all very different. And then you also get Zephecles? Zephecles. Yep, you get Zephecles in there a little bit, and Cassandora, Ramus. It's just, they're all very unique. They all feel like real people.
Yeah, they don't feel like automatons or a press mold of a hallowed knight has to be like this. They feel like characters with their own backgrounds and depth and like real noticeable personalities. When you read the book, and every time, like if you read a comment before it says who it said, you can probably guess who made that comment.
Yeah, especially Kadok. He was, if you go into this book thinking that you understand how Stormcasts act and that they must just all be boring, like noble, paladin type characters, read Kadok's lines in this and the way he interacts with people. He's when I was reading his stuff, he reminds me of like that stereotypical bully from the 1980s movies that picks on the nerds or whatever. It's just kind of how he came across to me.
So actually that's one of the things I really like about this book, because we get that insight and that understanding of that character from the Stormcast that we aren't used to. And I think this actually shows the most with Torglug, both because he's really unique as far as Stormcast characters go, but also because all the Stormcast characters react to Torglug, or Tornus rather, in a way that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, he's a very insecure character, which is, again, like something very interesting for a Stormcast who you imagine would just be, full of confidence. And especially when you consider his character before is Torglug, who is very full of confidence as a champion of Nurgle, and now is Tornus the Redeemed. He's a very insecure Stormcast and is very unsure of his worth and his place within Sigmar's plans. So it's just it gives you a different spin on it and a different perspective on everything that goes on, which is nice.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know this, Tornus the Redeemed is a Stormcast character who used to be a Lord of Plagues. He used to be Torglug, the Woodsman, like one of the top Nurgle warlords in the realms, and he was actually the guy who chased down Alarielle and nearly captured her.
And he tried, and I think one of the most interesting things too is because he's seconded to the Steel Souls in this novel, and they're the chamber that he personally attacked, like throughout the first half of the Realm Gate Wars story. Some of these characters he's literally killed, and others he has tried to kill, and now he has to fight alongside them, or more importantly, they have to fight alongside him, which is where a lot of the conflict with him comes from.
Yeah, a big part of his character arc is how these other Stormcasts, Tornus is the first of the redeemed, chaos tainted souls that have returned to the light. And even the Hallowed Knights, the sort of the guys who believe in Sigmar more than anyone, don't really accept him on face value. They're not sure about him. They don't necessarily trust him, and he doesn't necessarily trust himself because of that past. And I think that makes for a really, really interesting character.
Like I said, Josh is just every character he does in this, he does perfectly. And I mean, we've seen Tornus. Actually, I don't think we've seen him in a novel before. We've seen him in the campaign stories, though, and you never really got anything from that. It never dealt into his psyche at all. It was all just, here's Tornus, he's shooting arrows at Nurgle guys, and he's cool. But now we get to see, there's a lot more to him than that. And his interactions with his actual Lord Celestin, which I can't remember his name, Silas maybe, I think is what it was. And compared to his interactions with Gardas, how Gardas treats him, it's just really cool. And really quick before I forget about it, one of the things, sorry if you're going to touch on this later, but when I was started reading this novel, and I'm pretty sure it's in the first chapter, it opens up with Gardas back in Sigmaron in Azir, and you see, I can't remember how to say his name, Zephicles?
Zephicles.
And then the second character you're introduced to after him that Gardas talks to is Cassandora, who is a woman and a Stormcast. And it's just presented so, nonchalantly. Yes, this is just a thing. There are female Stormcasts. This one's a Lord Celestin. We get Enyo, who is a Knight Venator. And then throughout the rest of the story, whenever he's talking about some of the Stormcasts in the Warrior Chamber, it switches. I'd say it's about a 50-50 split between being male or female in, saying he or she. So it's really cool that it's just kind of, this is just how it is. Hasn't been mentioned before, but this is how the Stormcast Warrior Chambers are structured. It's just, it's an even split. It's whoever was worthy enough is who was reforged as a Stormcast. So it was just a really cool thing to see right off, the bat, right at the start of the story.
Yeah, I think this is one of the points that Josh might have been able to put in there because the setting has matured a bit. They've gone, oh yeah, of course women can be Stormcast Eternals. And then he's just put that in there as if, of course, that's a thing. And
because we've seen that one Stormcast model for Shadespire, which is the female Stormcast, and it's pretty similar looking, but At the same time, their armor is definitely different to accentuate the fact that it's a woman. But I asked Josh about it, and he said that it's, in his mind anyway, when he was writing this book, is that they're all indistinguishable in their armor. They all just look, like the Stormcast models that we have now, which is also, I think, a nice touch that you don't need to make them distinctly female looking in their armor. It's just, they're just there to do their job,
Yeah, and because they're all, like, blessed by Sigmar, they're all able to do this job because that's who they are. I think the characters are probably the absolutely, like, the strongest part of this book. There are a lot of them. They're really, really good. Like, if you've read previous Age of Sigmar stories and maybe felt some of the characters a bit flat, give this one a chance because this probably has the best characters in any Age of Sigmar novel so far.
I would agree with that. And, surprisingly, one of my favorite characters wasn't even Stormcast. It was Gatrock, one of the Knights of the Order of the Fly. Just a really interesting character and a really interesting character arc throughout the story. There's a lot more complexity to that in this book and in all of his books.
He has a way of making sure that even though, like, in Age of Sigmar there's clearly villains and there's clearly heroes, everyone has a reason for their actions. There's always a motivation that is understandable and relatable in some way, which makes them better and more rounded characters.
Yep, but at the same time, I'd say he's also not afraid to make a scenery-chewing, mustache-twirling bad guy every now and then for when it suits the narrative. And there's one in this story, and I don't know if I should say who it is because they come in a little bit later in the story. But I mean, even when he makes characters like that they're villainous, they know they're villainous, and they revel in it. He does it in a really fun and entertaining way. It never comes off as like ham-fisted or I mean, it can come off as over the top, but in a way like a wink nod. I realize this is over the top. Let's have fun with it kind of way.
I think Reynolds uses him to sort of spruce up sections that could otherwise get a little bit monotonous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree.
So this book has a fairly interesting setting, and one of the questions I always like to ask on these reviews is, does it capture the imagination? And I know my answer to this, but Tyler, did this book capture your imagination? Did it fire up your idea of what the Age of Sigmar could be?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the setting of this, like you said, is very unique, and being in the realm of chaos is also very abstract. So sometimes it's hard to picture certain parts of it. You got to kind of think of it in like almost like a Salvador Dali type way where it's off the walls, crazy, angles aren't proper, stuff is upside down, stuff is 360, and it very much captured, in my opinion anyway, like the feeling of being inside the realm of chaos and how it doesn't have to follow any rules except for Nurgle's. He makes the rules. But even beyond the Garden of Nurgle, I mean, the few scenes in Ghyran are, done very well. And then also, like I was saying earlier, all the stuff in Azir. Anytime there's anything with Azir, I'm always very, very interested to read it because we don't hear much about that realm and how, this is Sigmar's home base and basically the only place we see the Stormcast at peace or in a relaxed setting, not at war. So it's just always interesting for me reading those types of scenes. There's a scene in Azir in the beginning which involves Ramus, which is again a tie-in to his audio drama series, The Hunt for Nagash. And it's a really, really cool scene, and we get to see some really cool characters and some characters speak and interact that, coming at this from reading a lot of 40K books, there's a certain characters in 40K that you wouldn't ever expect to actually see portrayed in a novel because they're kind of untouchable characters. And in Age of Sigmar, apparently that's just not the case, and it's refreshing. It's refreshing to see basically everything tackled. Like nothing is off limits.
Yeah, and I think that that last part there is the name of the game here. This is probably the uh, definitely one of the most off the walls books. Like you go into the realm of Nurgle, you go into the Plague Garden, and Josh spends quite a lot of time describing what this garden looks like. And then this book gives the idea of Nurgle more depth by giving the Garden of Nurgle a lot of variety.
Yep, it has, basically different parts of it explore every different aspect of what Nurgle embodies. He's about life. He's not about death. He's about abundant life, unchecked life. It's nice to see something like that explored in more depth too, and really just like given the page count it needs.
Yeah, because this isn't a short book either. This is a
Mm-mm.
fairly like solid novel.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the longest novel for Age of Sigmar yet.
Like that's my one sort of criticism is that even though there's a lot of great characters and the action is a lot of fun, the format of the story once it goes into a certain part doesn't change until the end.
Yeah, it becomes a, uh, kind of like without giving too much away, like a chase. And that pretty much sticks that format throughout. But at that point, I think the story becomes more about the characters and less about the action in a way. I don't want to say, and there's definitely tons of action and tons of stuff going on. But the most interesting parts of that story are the characters and the way they interact with that.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think Reynolds does a great job in like varying up the action and the setting and what's going on, but it is a very long chase sequence
Yeah,
for parts of the book, and that's sort
yeah.
of my one criticism of this, really.
Uh,
But
I, I I think he threw in enough stuff to vary it up. It never grew tiring to me because there was always, even if it was still the same chase, there was always some new little thing that he put in there that is different from what we've seen before.
yeah, definitely, he does make a really good work of that, and he uses his setting quite well because this is a book that fills a lot of uh, gaps and expands a lot on the setting. At least I feel like uh, that first like chapter in Azir
Hmm.
really gives us, as you've been saying, like gives us a lot of insight into rituals and attitudes from the Stormcast that we've sort of been hinting at, but now we see an example of how do Stormcast Eternals deal with permanent death? How does that afflict them when you have permanent death of one of their own? And I think things like that, things like the internal politics of Nurgle, really for me sort of filled out and made these factions more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, even beyond just like you're saying, how they deal with death, there's, for me, like the fact that the story opened with Gardas just like in his room. He wasn't even wearing his armor and stuff, and the fact that, we've never seen a Stormcast not wearing his armor. And it's just these kind of like small little day-to-day things that it interests me because, there's plenty of Stormcasts that are up in Sigmaron or garrisoning a city somewhere that aren't, they're not fighting. They're not fighting every day. So what do they do to occupy themselves? How do they interact with each other when they're not fighting? It's just kind of like these mundane, everyday things for a race of people created specifically for fighting. Um, and there's a theme he just touches on just a little bit in parts of this that it reminds me a little bit of the Horus Heresy stuff because they talk about, well, we're created for war. That's our purpose. We're created for fighting. What happens once the fighting is done? What are we supposed to do? What do we want to do? Because a lot of them don't even know anything beyond that anymore. So it's like, what what am I supposed to do once there's no one left to fight? Because at some point, ideally, that is what they aim to have happen. So it's just interesting things like that that I hope we see more of too in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a favorite like minor detail. Apparently, Lord Celestins have armor servants that help them put on their armor.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah. I'd love to see a Lord Celestin eat breakfast or something. You know,
we haven't seen them eat yet, which was a
no, we
topic
haven't.
in City of Secrets.
Yeah, it's just little things that is unimportant in the Games Workshop campaign books because it's not going to move the story along, and they've got X amount of pages. But in a Black Library book, it's just little things that the authors can take just a few sentences here and there to kind of drop hints at, or just fill in little blank spaces on stuff like that is unimportant to the game as a game setting, because you don't need to know what a Stormcast eats when you're fighting on the table. But it's just, for me, something that makes the universe more full.
Yeah, absolutely. And with a book like this, with every book I review, I always wonder, like, how can we tie this sort of into the hobby? Have you been reading this and like going, oh, that scene would be cool to recreate, or ooh, I could do a Nurgle army like this. Have you like had that feel from this book? Is this something that you could get inspired to do hobby about? Like,
Well, I did paint up a Hollowed Knight Stormcast while reading this, so it was definitely something that inspired me in that aspect. I mean, there's tons of scenes in this book that would make for, I think, really fun narrative battles. To recreate a lot of the stuff in here, you'd have to do a lot of kind of rules crafting on your own to set up some of the situations they're in, because there's nothing currently similar to it in the Age of Sigmar rule set. But it's just, it would definitely be a cool linked series of battles, I think.
yeah, I was thinking like this, recreating parts of this story would be perfect for a skirmish size game, because a lot of the story goes on with like fewer than 30 stormcasts,
Mm-hmm.
as little as like less than 10, and in parts just one guy. And that would be perfect to like take that part of the story, put it on a table, put down some Nurgle guys, and sort of play it out. I think
Yep, no, I agree.
And like every part of this Nurgle's realm was like, this would be a really, really cool table.
Yes.
Well, at least the parts that would be physically possible to build. There's a couple of parts here that you just couldn't make into a table.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd be able to build a few of those cities.
And I love the idea that part ways in here we get the dandy Nurgles, like the aristocratic Nurgle faction, which have like rotten handkerchiefs and all that sort of stuff. And like
monocles.
That would be an amazing conversion.
Well, did you see the? All I could think of when I was reading those scenes were the from Mordheim, the Carnival of Chaos models, where it had plague bearers and like ruffled collars and like because they're supposed to be like carnival actors and like stage actors, and they had them all like Shakespearean outfits and stuff. Some really cool models from back in the day.
Yeah, I was thinking more like the Prince from Blackadder. Like all of them are him.
Yeah.
It's just like, yeah. So I think this is a book that if you like Nurgle especially, or if you sort of like Stormcast, there's a lot of good hobby inspiration here.
Yeah, there's definitely a bunch of cool little hooks you can kind of dig into and expand on for your army. I mean, just if someone like wanted to go through and remake the Steel Souls, and actually make unique models for like Enyo and Kadok and Morbus, could be a really cool model, especially in the way he's portrayed as the story progresses. I know Paul from Mortal Realms converted up a Morbus conversion based off of later in this story that you can find on Twitter. It's just pretty cool looking.
Yeah, like reading these books makes me sort of regret making a custom Storm host for my Stormcast.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot of great stuff in here. So to round it off, would you recommend this book to anyone interested, or who would you recommend this book to?
Anyone and everyone, really. Definitely, if you're a fan of Age of Sigmar, I would read this. If you've been reading the past books, I would read this. If you've been reading Josh Reynolds' books, I would definitely read this. Because seriously, you'll be very entertained by the way he's hooked all of his stories together in ways that you wouldn't necessarily think of either. And, you know, I try to think if this would be a good first book if you're trying to, like, get someone interested in the Age of Sigmar fiction that hasn't read anything. I want to say yes. At the same time, I think this book definitely benefits from having some prior knowledge of the storyline so far. You wouldn't be lost without it, but you gain a lot from knowing it. But definitely anyone that, I mean, just really anyone. If you want to pick up an Age of Sigmar book, this is probably one of the best ones out there right now, if not the best one. And I mean, it's strong writing, so it's a good place to start.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna start with the fiction, like no experience, I'd probably start with City of Secrets, just because it's more, it's got human main characters,
Yeah,
and you
human level.
don't need to know what the Stormcast are. But if you've sort of maybe read stuff, or you've gotten like impressions, and you maybe flicked through a battle tome, I'd probably call this book almost essential to read, because it gives so much depth to the Stormcast Eternals, and it really shows what you can do in a Age of Sigmar setting.
Yeah, I agree. It's and you know, he's got the next Age of Sigmar book coming out is also a Josh Reynolds book with the 8 Lamentations in September, I think. So, and he's stated that is, you know, hopefully the start of a trilogy, and this one as well is the start of a trilogy or a series if it does well enough, which I think it has been doing well enough. So I'm pretty sure he's probably been given the green light on that to move forward with it. So it's cool to see him also like really being able to kind of direct where the Age of Sigmar setting is going, at least in this kind of, you know, more filled out level that the novels allow us.
Yeah, it's awesome to see that he's had enough success that he can pitch these probably unusual ideas and be allowed to write books and maybe even get entire series as long as they keep selling. I think the next book, the 8 Lamentations one, is going to be really interesting. Since
Yes.
It's got, a human, a vampire, and a Dwarden as the main characters?
Yep, and he said that vampire, if you've read Nagash the Undying King, is the Blood Knight from that novel, is the vampire in 8 Lamentations.
Oh my.
So again, more connections there between all of his books.
Yeah, so it's probably also going to be great. I think we're running a bit out of time. I'm not going to take more time out of your lunch.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here. And for those of my listeners who haven't already heard where to reach you already, websites, Twitter handles, where can people get a hold of you?
So website is mangleminiatures.com, or just Google search Mangle Miniatures, it will come up. Instagram, I'm Mangle Minis. Twitter, I'm of course Jimbo9Jimbo, and also Mangle Minis. Yeah, I think that's all. Facebook, Mengel Miniatures. You can search on there, but I'm also active as myself, Tyler Mengel, in all the major Age of Sigmar Facebook groups, and then also TGA as well.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a good lunch.
Thank you.
That's it for this mini-sode. Tune in next week for another segment, or go back to find the full episode, which is released monthly. If you'd like more content, check out my YouTube channel, Fjordhammer TV, for videos, uploads of the episodes, and some exclusive content, including streaming. You can also follow me on Twitter at Darth_Alec and at Fjordhammer, or on Facebook at Fjordhammer. There you'll find pictures of my work, and I'll be taking feedback. If you prefer to send me a mail, you can do that at fjordhammerpodcast@gmail.com. So until next time, ha det bra!